Kia ora guys, Michelle here. This week I want to talk to you about two examples of what I'm calling trail fear. The first example of trail fear that I want to talk to you about is on-trail fear, and specifically getting lost on trail. Losing your way while you're out in the wilderness, especially if you're not comfortable with your environment, can be a pretty scary thing. You'll recall a few weeks back, Mum and I hiked the Tarawera Trail over in Rotorua. The Tarawera Trail is a day hike which requires getting a water taxi to one end or the other. Based on all of the information that I'd gathered, I decided that it was a good idea for us to get the water taxi out to the far end of the trail, start from there and then walk back to where we were going to park the car at the trail car park. I'd gotten it into my head that there was a nice little stopping place part way along the trail, roughly around about the third of the way mark, where we could get into some hot pools and soak our feet. When we got onto the water taxi, the gentleman operating the taxi was talking to some of the other people about stopping at the hot pools. Sort of half listening and half overhearing, I had managed to gather from that it was going to take about an hour to an hour and a half for us to walk from the trailhead at Hot Water Beach to these hot pools. So off Mum and I trundled, and we got to this stopping place where we had to ford a stream. About 20 to 30 minutes later, we met some hikers coming in the opposite direction. We'd probably been on trail now for about 3 hours. So we asked these people coming in the opposite direction whether they'd seen the hot pools, and they said, no, we haven't passed any hot pools. So after they'd left, Mum and I had a little bit of a chat about this, and we decided that maybe we'd walk past the trail. So sure enough, we carried on back to the section of the trail where we'd had to ford the stream, and there was this unmarked trail that we could only assume led down to these hot pools. And so we set off along this trail. And it wasn't too long before I realised that something was not quite right. For a start with, there were no orange markers marking this trail. Now in New Zealand, just about every single trail is marked by little fluorescent or reflective orange trail markers to let you know that you're going in the right direction. They're all triangles, and there was none of this. On top of that, whereas the first little section of the trail was quite well formed, it wasn't too long before it started to get quite overgrown, and it was becoming very difficult to see where the trail actually went. Now this is where I interject here a little bit, because luckily for me, I had just read a book by Bear Grylls called How to Stay Alive. One of his sections of the book covers getting lost in the woods, and it said that one of the ways that you can prevent getting lost is to make sure that you do a couple of things. So one of the things you can do is to keep looking behind you as you're heading down a trail to make sure that you can recognize what the trail looks like as and when you need to turn around. The second thing that he recommends is look for landmarks. So there were a few different little landmarks and things. I was trying to remember large logs that I had to clamber over, big clearings that we had come to, and we were doing pretty well, and I was keeping an eye, luckily for us, on the stream that was running directly down to the side of us. But eventually, after 20 to 25 minutes of walking down this trail, I just realised that this was not safe anymore for us. We didn't really know where we were going. We didn't have any compasses, we hadn't told anybody that we were going to be heading down this trail, and we had already been on trail for a lot longer than the recommended time for where we were at on the trail. And so we decided to turn around, and within 2 to 3 minutes of turning around and heading in the opposite direction, I realised that I was completely lost. I had lost the trail, I didn't recognise anything, I couldn't really hear the river anymore that I knew was not too far away from us, and panic set in. And I just remember this feeling sort of filling me up right from my toes all the way up my legs, and then eventually getting to my stomach and just turning my stomach into absolute jelly. And my heart started to race and the panic really started to set in. And that's where, again, I found myself remembering Bear Grylls' advice, which is do not panic. And so here begins the lesson on what to do if you get lost in the woods. The first piece of advice that Bear Grylls gave me, which is thankfully the main piece of advice that I remembered, was do not panic. The only issue was that in this time I had said to Mum, I don't think this is the way anymore. And obviously my vocalising that instantly made her panic. And so then I all of a sudden not only had to deal with the panic that I myself was feeling, but also trying to calm her panic down as well. There's a pretty well recognised acronym for what to do if you get lost in the wood, and that is the STOP acronym. S stands for stop, T stands for think, O stands for observe, and P stands for plan. So obviously stop means stop in your tracks, don't do anything until you know exactly what you're doing, because the worst thing you can do if you get lost is to continue to move in a different direction. You're just going to end up even more lost. Think is to stop that panic from arising in you and causing you to make a silly decision. So that's exactly what we ended up doing in these circumstances. Observe means look around, listen, try to recognise the landmarks and things that you think you might have gone past. Look for signs of human life and intervention, so things like broken branches, even discarded rubbish and bits and pieces like that. Look for streams or any indication of other wilderness type landmarks that you can follow back to the trail that you came from. And plan obviously means make a plan for what you're going to do. Now in all of this panic, I had done probably the worst thing I could have done, and I'd decided to take charge of the situation myself. But the problem was that I hadn't remembered one of the key landmarks that I needed to remember in order to get us back to the trail. Whereas Mum was piping away in my ear about this landmark and I wasn't actually hearing her. So that just highlights the importance of, when you're in a situation like that, make sure to listen to the other members of your team, because you just don't know what you might have forgotten and they might have remembered. Now we were very lucky in our situation and we managed to get back to our trail within about 30 minutes of getting lost on it. But you know, there are a lot of people out there who get lost in the woods in much more dire situations, and in those sorts of situations there are a number of things that you can do in order to make yourself safe. Now the number one thing obviously you can do is be prepared in the first place. Lots and lots of people rely on GPSs these days, so just be sensible about these sorts of things. If you're going out into the woods, take a paper map or something with you. At the minimum, take a compass with you. Usually you don't want to move too far from the place that you've become lost, just in case you end up moving even further into a bad situation. But if you do decide that you want to do a little bit of a recce of the area, a good idea is to place a large bright marker onto a tree or something that you can easily see before you go wandering off in any direction. And that's so that you can quite confidently then go 5, 10, 15 paces without forgetting exactly where you started off at. As I mentioned, one really good tool is to stay alert, and this also includes being aware of where you are all the time. Take notice of landmarks and things that you're passing. Of course, the most likely time that people are going to get lost is in dense, thick forest, because that is the hardest environment to try and figure out where you're in. So if you are walking through an environment where there is dense, thick forest, try to imagine the landscape. Try to imagine where the hills are and whether you're walking through a valley, and get a feel and a sense for that landscape as you're walking. One other really great tip, which I did consider using, I had my phone camera with me. I seriously did consider just setting my phone to record, putting the front-facing camera on and literally just holding it just over my shoulder here as I was walking down this trail. Now it probably seems silly, but all I would have needed to do was, when I eventually got to the place where I decided to turn around, was literally put my phone on, go to that video and then scroll through it in reverse, and that hopefully would have given me a relatively accurate idea of how to find the trail on the way back. Okay, so you're lost and you're stuck and you can't find your way out. What do you need to do? Well, again, it's all about being prepared. This is part of the reason why I make sure I never hike, even if it is just a very short day hike, without some warm layers of clothing, an emergency blanket and some basic emergency supplies, fire starting equipment, and also a head torch. So carry those things. It's really a minimal weight when you consider the fact that, you could potentially save your life. Okay, now the second example of trail fear that I want to talk to you about is that anticipatory type fear. For me, this takes the form of my fear about going on my first overnight hike. So one of the main things that I try to do is eliminate my fear of the unknown, because I find that that is the biggest fear that I have when it comes to anticipatory fears about hiking. So what things are unknown to me? The facilities at the hut. Am I going to be too hot? Am I going to be too cold? How many other people are going to be in the hut with me? Is there going to be a ranger there? What sort of toilet facilities do they have? What's the water quality like? And these things go on and on and on, and they can be quite anxiety inducing. One way of potentially dealing with this is, if you can, to hike out to the hut beforehand and get a bit of a lay of the land. So I'm actually thinking about doing that this coming weekend with one of the huts I'm planning on overnighting at. I think this will give me a really good opportunity to get myself comfortable with that environment, to get myself into a situation where I can see that environment before I actually go and commit to staying there. It also gives me an opportunity to pack up my bag and get out on trail, which I haven't done for a few weeks now. The second thing that I try to do is to eliminate irrational fears. I characterize these quite often as what if type thoughts, and for me they're probably twofold. The two biggest irrational fears that I have. The first one obviously is other people. I'm terrified of getting murdered in my sleep in a hut. And the second one is long drops. So let's talk about the first fear, getting murdered in your sleep at the huts. Now, I could be completely wrong, but in New Zealand, I think the danger of something bad happening to you as a result of some other person being aggressive towards you whilst you're out in the New Zealand backcountry are relatively small. Certainly I wouldn't be anywhere near as scared about sleeping overnight in a backcountry hut in New Zealand as I would be, say, for example, camping somewhere like the Pacific Crest Trail or the Appalachian Trail in the United States. At the end of the day, it's all about doing what makes you feel comfortable. So one of the most helpful things that you can do to get a little bit more comfortable about being in an environment with people you don't know is to take along people that you do know. So this has been one of my biggest motivating factors in starting up a local hiking group in my area. My intention has been to get together a group of similar-minded people who are all passionate about the outdoors but have just been forced into situations where they have to hike alone because they don't have a group of people around them who have that passion. A large part of the fear of other people that I have as well is due to my introversion. Now, I want to get something clear right from the outset here. My assumption 2 years ago was that introversion meant that you just didn't like being around other people, you couldn't function in that sort of an environment, and basically it was just very anxiety inducing for you. Now, it was told to me that introversion and extroversion actually don't have so much to do with how you interact around other people as it does to how you recharge your batteries. Basically, extroverts recharge their batteries by being around other people and being in very vibrant, very happening social settings. Introverts recharge their batteries by basically going into themselves. Now, this was kind of a revolutionary idea to me because people kept telling me that I was an introvert, and yet I kept feeling like I don't actually always feel uncomfortable when I'm around other people. In fact, I can be quite sociable, and I can be the life of the party. But I then realised that yes, I can be in those settings, but they're actually incredibly exhausting for me. And this becomes particularly difficult if you do want to get out hiking into the backcountry and you want to stay in huts, because unfortunately, you probably are going to have to share that environment with a few other people, if not quite a few other people. So really understanding yourself and what makes yourself tick and how you can deal with those feelings as and when they creep up becomes very important. And I think for me the biggest thing is maybe to take a set of noise cancelling headphones to cancel out all of that background noise and chatter, which really seems to just drive the anxiety levels up in me. Taking a book so that I can again drown that all out, taking a crossword puzzle, and just being comfortable enough in myself that I know that I can just apologize, maybe withdraw myself from a social setting and just go and be comfortable doing my own thing in a different area of the hut for an hour or two. Having said that, so far whilst I've been on my hiking journey and I've come across other people who also have that passion, I have not found it taxing at all to be around those sorts of people. And I think that's just because that it's something now that I am very, very passionate about, and so any opportunity that I can get to discuss those types of things with other people, I just grab by both hands, and it really doesn't feel like too much of a hassle at all. So that brings me to my second irrational fear, which is long drop toilets. Brief story, on my first foray into hiking in the backcountry wilderness, when Mum and I decided to do the Poakai crossing around this time last year, I needed the toilet while I was up there. I'd never used a long drop in New Zealand before. I had no idea what I was expecting. I don't really even know what thought was going through my head, except for the fact that that looks like a relatively decent toilet, and so it must flush or something, or it must just be like a portaloo with chemicals and things in the bottom. And I got in there and I pulled the lid up and was immediately greeted with, you know, what you would be greeted with in a long drop toilet, and freaked out, and the smell was horrible, and it was raining outside, and there were no taps or anything in there, obviously. And so I spent the whole time trying to hover over this toilet, completely appalled by what I was doing, and I don't know, it scarred me. Now, I'm a big proponent of leave no trace. Considering my biggest environment that I hike in is the Tongariro National Park, just pooping on the trail is not really a done thing. Even if you do sort of dig your cat hole down to the required depth, then you make sure that you're far enough away from the trail, etc. I'm sure it's done, and it's very tempting for me to want to do that, because I would much rather do that than go in a long drop, but I feel like I have an environmental responsibility to use these long drop toilets. So I am going to put that one on ice, and I'm going to update you guys on that a little bit later on. But if you are somebody who also struggles with an irrational fear of long drop toilets and you've figured out a way to get over it, please leave me a comment down below and tell me how you're dealing with it, because I would love to know. Now, there's a couple of other tips that I will pass on to people who have that anticipatory fear of getting out on their first overnight hike, some things that have made me feel a little bit more comfortable about that. One is the personal locator beacon issue. Now, I am a beginner hiker. I really do balk at the idea of paying $500, $600, $700 for my own personal locator or emergency beacon. It's really not safe to go out, especially on your own, into the wilderness without some sort of emergency locating device. One thing that I have found out just recently is that there is an organisation in my local town here who will hire out personal locator beacons, and that is just fantastic. They hire them out for something like $10 a day, I think, and I just think that that is a really fantastic option for somebody like me who is just starting out, getting themselves comfortable with going out on overnight hikes, and is still not really sure if it's something that they're going to be really getting into in the future. So go and check out in your local region where you can hire personal locator beacons from. In addition to that, because of some other things that I had going on and some other ideas that I had, I just recently took a first aid course with the Red Cross of New Zealand. And I have to say that ever since doing that course, I've been feeling much more confident about going out on trail, either by myself but also with groups of people, especially my hiking group. And I would definitely recommend courses like that for building your confidence. You may recall a few months back I did a river safety course with Outdoor Training New Zealand. Again, that did nothing more than to build up my confidence when it comes to river safety in New Zealand. And I know that there are also a lot of other wilderness type courses that are offered around the country and probably overseas as well, I'm sure, that you can go and enroll yourself on, particularly things like orienteering, navigation, bushcraft skills and that sort of thing. Okay, so that's it for my 2 examples of on-trail fear. It was really my intention to share some slightly more personal thoughts with you, especially when it comes to my journey with anxiety and fear management and all that sort of stuff. And also, you know, not forgetting that I started this channel as a beginner's guide to through hiking, if you like, and showing you, you know, how I'm embarking on my journey towards through hiking from the real grassroots level. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Don't forget to go and check me out on Facebook and Instagram, where I've been trying to post some stuff over there quite regularly about what's going on. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I will catch you in a couple of weeks with the next installment.